네, 안녕하십니까. 2020년 1월 7일 영어 스피킹 연습 66일차 시작하겠습니다. 네, 오늘도 마찬가지로 리처드 파인만 천재 물리학자의 시각에서 바라본 세상이라는 영상을 가지고 한 문장씩 듣고 한 문장씩 따라 해보겠습니다.
Even when I was a small boy,
Even when I was a small boy, even when I was a small boy,
Papa used to sit me on his lap and read to me from the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Papa used to sit me on his lap and read to me from Encyclopedia Britannica. Papa used to sit me on his lap and read to me from Encyclopedia Britannica. Papa used to sit me on his lap and read to me from Encyclopedia Britannica.
Papa used to sit me on his lap and read to me from the Encyclopedia Britannica.
From Encyclopedia Britannica.
And we would read, say, about dinosaurs.
And we will say about dinosaur. And we will say about dinosaur.
They would say something like,
And they will say something like, and they will say something like,
thing is 25 feet high,
this thing is 25 feet high,
and the head is 6 feet across.
and the head is 6 feet across.
So he'd stop me and say, let's see what
And so it stopped me to say,
that means.
let's see what that means. And so it stopped me, and so it stopped me to say, let's see what that means.
That would mean that if he stood in our front yard,
Stood up, good job. That would mean that if that stood in our front yard. That would mean that if stood in our front yard. That would mean that if that stood in our front yard.
it would be high enough to put his head through the window.
It would be high enough. It would be high enough to put his head through the window,
But not quite, because the head is a little bit too wide.
but not quite because the head is a little bit too wide. But not quite because the head is a little bit too wide. But not quite because the head is a little bit too wide.
It was very exciting and interesting to think that there were some animals.
And it was very exciting and interesting to think that there were animals
Of such magnitude that they all died out.
and they all died out.
And at that time, nobody knew why.
And at the time nobody knew
So
why.
that's the way I was educated by my father.
And so that's the way I was educated by my father. So that's the way I was educated by my father.
Feynman's scientific style was always to look for the simplest, most elementary solution to a problem that was possible. If it wasn't,
Feynman's scientific style was always to look for the simplest, most elementary solution to a problem that was possible.
possible, you had to use something fancier.
If it wasn't possible, you had to use something fancier. You had to use something fancier. If it wasn't possible, you had to use something fancier.
But no doubt part of this was his great joy and pleasure in showing people that he could think more simply than they could.
But no doubt a part of this was his great joy and pleasure in showing people that he could think more simply than they could.
But he also truly believed that if you couldn't explain something simply, you didn't understand it.
But he also truly believed, that if you couldn't explain something simply, you didn't understand it.
My cousin at that time having considerable difficulty with algebra.
My cousin at the time was 3 years older and was having considerable difficulty with his algebra, with algebra,
And had a tutor, Cam.
and had a tutor came,
And
and
I was allowed to sit in the corner while the tutor would try to
teach,
teach my cousin algebra.
and I was allowed to sit in the corner while the tutor teach my cousin, while the tutor tried to teach my cousin, would try to teach my cousin algebra,
And
and
so problems like 2x plus, I said to him,
so the problems like 2x, I said to
my cousin,
cousin,
and I said, what are you trying to do?
what they're trying to do. What are you trying to do?
You don't talk about x. He said, well, you know, 2x
And he talk, and he says, I hear him talking about what x is.
plus 7 is equal to 15, he said.
You know, this problems is like 2x plus 7 equals 15.
I'm trying to find out what x is. I said, you mean
You are trying to find out what x is. You mean 4.
4? He says, yeah, but you did it with arithmetic. You
He
have
says,
to
yeah, but you did it by arithmetic.
do it by algebra.
You have to do it by algebra.
And that's why my cousin was never able to do algebra.
That's why my cousin was my cousin was never able to do algebra.
He didn't understand how he was supposed to do it.
He didn't understand how he was supposed to do it.
There was no way.
There's
I
no
learned
way.
algebra, fortunately, by not going to
I learned algebra fortunately by not going to school.
school. By knowing the whole idea was to find out what x was, and it didn't make any difference how you did it.
Knowing the whole idea was to find out what x was, and it didn't make any difference of how you did it.
There's no such a thing as you don't do it by arithmetic, you do it by algebra.
There's no such thing as you do it by algebra, you do it by arithmetic, you do it by algebra.
It's a false thing that they had invented in school.
There's a false statement that they invented in school. Invented in a school.
So that the children who have to study algebra can all pass it.
So that the children who have to study the algebra cannot pass it.
They had invented a set of rules which, if you followed them without thinking, could produce the answer.
They invented a set of rules which, if you follow them without thinking, could produce the answer.
Subtract 7 from both sides.
Subtract 7 both sides.
If you have a multiplier, divide both sides by the multiplier, and so on. A series of
If you have a multiplier, divide both sides by multiplier, and so on.
steps by which you could get the answer if you didn't understand what you were trying to do.
A series of steps by which you could get the answer. If you don't understand what you're trying to do.
I have a friend who's an artist, and
I have a friend who's an artist.
he's sometimes taken a view which I don't agree with very well.
He sometimes takes a view which I don't agree with very well.
He'll hold up a flower and say, look how
He hold up the flower and say, look how
beautiful it is.
beautiful it is.
And I'll agree,
I agree, I think.
He says, you see, as I as an artist can see how beautiful it is.
So he says, you see as an artist. He says, you see I as an artist.
He says, but you as a scientist, take this off. And he says, you see, as I as an artist can see how beautiful this is.
And he says, you see, I as an artist can see how beautiful this is.
But you as a scientist, take this all apart and it becomes dull, thin.
Oh, but you as a scientist, take this all apart and it becomes a third thing.
And I think that he's kind of nutty.
And I think he's kind of nutty. I think that he kind of nutty.
First of all,
the
beauty that he sees is available to other people and to me too.
The beauty that he sees is available to other people and to me too.
I believe, although I may not be quite as refined as aesthetically as he is,
I believe, although I may not be quite quite as refined as aesthetically he is. I believe, although I may not be quite as refined as aesthetically he is,
But I can't appreciate the beauty of the flower.
but I can appreciate the beauty of the flower.
At the same time,
At the
I
same
see
time.
much more about the flower
At the same time, I see much more about the flower
than he sees.
than he sees.
I could imagine the cells in it, the
I can imagine the cells in there,
complicated actions inside, which also have a beauty.
the complicated action inside, which also have a beauty. The complicated action inside, which have also beauty.
I mean, it's not just beauty at this dimension of 1 centimeter.
I mean, it's not just beauty at this dimension of 1 centimeter.
There's also beauty at a smaller dimension.
There's also beauty at small dimensions.
The inner structure, also the processes,
The inner structure, also the processes.
the fact that the colors and the flower evolved in order to attract insects to pollinate it is interesting.
The fact that the colors in a flower, the colors in the flower evolved in order to attract the insects to pollinate it is interesting. The fact that the colors in the flower evolved in order to pollinate, in order to attract insects to pollinate it, is interesting. The fact that the colors in the flower evolved in order to attract the insects to pollinate it is interesting. The fact that the colors in the flower evolved in order to attract the insects to pollinate it is interesting. The fact that the colors in the flower evolved in order to attract the insects to pollinate it is interesting. The fact that the colors in the flower evolved in order to attract the insects to pollinate it is interesting.
Means that insects can see the color.
It means that insects can see the color.
It adds a question.
It adds a question.
Aesthetic sense also exists in the lower
Does this aesthetic sense also exist in the lower forms?
forms. Does it? Why is it aesthetic?
Why is it aesthetic? Why is it aesthetic?
All kinds of interesting questions,
All kinds of interesting questions
which the science knowledge only adds to the
which shows science knowledge only adds to the
excitement and mystery and the awe of a flower.
to the excitement and mystery and awe of a flower. All kinds of these things, which is science knowledge only adds, which is just science knowledge only adds the to the excitement and mystery and over flower.
Flower, it only adds. I don't understand how it subtracts.
It only adds. I don't understand how it subtracts.
Their father, Melville Simon, worked for a company which made uniforms.
Their father, Melvin Feynman, worked for the company which he made uniforms.
This exposure to the military led to a strong rejection of authority.
This exposure toward military led to a strong rejection of authority,
A value he instilled in his son.
a value he instilled to his son.
One of the things that my father taught me was that
My father told me was
disrespect.
disrespect.
You open a picture in the New York Times, maybe it was a general.
He opened the picture of New York Times. Maybe it was a general.
Say, now look at these humans, he'd say.
And he's and now look and he says, now look at these humans. And he says, now look at these humans.
Here's one human standing here, and all these others are bowing. Now, what is the difference? Why?
Here's a one human standing here, and all these others are bowing. What is the difference?
Why are they all bowing to?
Why are all they all bowing to?
Only because of his name and his position.
Only because of his name and his position.
Because of his uniform.
Because his uniform.
Not because of something he especially did.
Not because of something he especially did. Not because of something he especially did. Not because of something he especially did.
What Feynman hated worse than anything else was intellectual pretense.
What Feynman hated most. What Feynman hated. What Feynman hated.
What Feynman hated worse than anything else was intellectual pretense.
Worse than anything else. What Feynman hated worse than anything else was intellectual pretense.
Phoniness.
Holiness.
False sophistication.
False sophistication.
Jargon.
Jargon.
Was it worth the Nobel Prize?
Was it worse a Nobel Prize? Was it worse a Nobel Prize? Was it worse a Nobel Prize?
Listen,
Answer.
I don't know anything about the Nobel Prize. I
I don't know anything about Nobel Prize.
don't understand what it's all about or what
I don't understand what it's all about or
it's worth what.
what's worth what. I don't understand what it's all about. What it's all about or what's worth what.
And if the people in the Swedish Academy decided X,
And if the people in the Swedish Academy decided
Y, or Z wins a Nobel Prize, then so
X, Y, or Z wins a Nobel Prize,
be it.
then so be it.
I think that it was entirely right and proper.
I think that it was entirely right and proper.
It was one of the, one of the
It was one of the
best earned
best earned
Nobel Prizes there ever was, I would say.
Nobel Prizes there ever was. I would say.
I don't see that it makes any point.
I don't see that it makes any point. I see that it makes any point. I don't see that it makes any point.
That someone in the Swedish Academy decides
That someone in Swedish Academy decides
that this work is noble enough
that this work is noble enough
to receive a prize. I've
to
already
receive the prize.
got the prize.
I've already got the prize.
The prize is the pleasure of finding the thing out.
The prize is the pleasure.
To receive a prize. I've already got the prize. The prize is the pleasure of finding the thing out.
Pleasures of finding the thing out. The prizes, the pleasures of finding the thing out.
To receive a prize. I've already got the prize. The prize is the pleasure of finding the thing out.
The prize is the pleasure of finding a thing out. The prize is the pleasure of finding the thing out.
The kick in the discovery.
The kick in the discovery. The kick in the discovery. The kick in the discovery. The kick in the discovery. Kick. 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 Pick up. Kick. Kick. I get a kick out of driving fast cars. 빠른 차를 볼 때 기분이 좋다. 쾌감이 느낀다. I get a kick out of driving fast cars. The kick in the discovery.
The observation other people use it.
The observation other people use it. the observation that other people use it, the observation that other people use it,
The thing out, the kick in the discovery, the observation other people use it.
the observation that other people use it, the observation that other people use it.
Those are the real things.
Those are real things. Those are real things. Those are the real things.
The honors are unreal.
The honors, the honors, unreal. The honors are unreal.
Those are the real things. The honors are unreal
The honors are unreal. Are unreal
to me.
to me.
I don't believe in honors.
I don't believe in honors. I don't believe in. I don't. I don't. I don't believe in honors. I don't believe in honors.
It bothers me. Honors bothers me. Honors.
It bothers me. Honors bothers me. Honors bother me. It bothers me. Honors bother me.
I don't believe in honors. It bothers me. Honors bothers me. Honors is
Honors bothers me.
epaulets. Honors
Honors epaulets.
is uniforms.
Honors uniforms.
My papa brought me up this way.
My papa brought me up this way.
I can't stand it. It hurts me.
I can't stand it. It hurts me. 네, 드디어 다 했습니다. 네. 드디어 이제 이 영상 6분짜리였는데, 드디어 한번 따라하고 읽을 수 있었네요. 그러면 지금 그래도 한 10분 정도 시간이 남았으니까, 처음부터 다시 한번 해보겠습니다. 같이 따라할 수 있으면 따라.
Even when I was a small boy,
Even when I was a small boy,
Papa used to sit me on his lap and read to me from the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Papa used to sit me on his lap and read to me from an Encyclopedia Britannica.
And we would say about dinosaurs.
And we will say about dinosaur.
They would say something like,
They will say something like,
this thing is
this thing is 25 feet high,
and the head
and
is
the head
6
is
feet across.
6 feet across.
So he'd stop me and he'd say, let's see what that
And so it stopped me to say, and so it stopped me to say,
means. That
let's see
would
what that means. What
mean
do
that
you
if he
mean? That if he
stood in our front
stood
yard,
stood in
he'd be
our
high enough
That means that if instead stood in our front yard,
to put his head through the window, but not stood in our front yard, he would be high enough to put his head through the window,
he would be high enough to put his head through the window,
but not quite because the head is a little bit too wide.
but not quite because the head is a little bit too wide.
It was very exciting and interesting to think that there was matter
I was very excited and interesting to think that there were animals of such a magnitude,
that they all
but
died.
they all died, and at the time nobody knew why.
So
So
that's the way I
that's the way I was educated by my father. Feynman's scientific style was always to look for the simplest, most elementary solution to a problem that was possible.
If it wasn't possible,
It wasn't. If it wasn't possible, you had to use something fancier. But no doubt, the part of this was his great joy and pleasure in showing people that he could think more simply than they could. But he also believed, truly believed, if you couldn't explain something simply, you still didn't understand it.
who was 3 years old
My cousin at the time, who was 3 years older,
was having considerable
Was having-
difficulty with algebra
was having considerable difficulty with his algebra
and had a tutor.
and had a tutor camp.
And
And
I was allowed to
I was allowed to sit
while
with him while the tutor would
try to
try to
teach my
teach
cousin
my
algebra.
cousin algebra.
And
And
so problems
so
like
problems
2x
like 2x
plus,
plus-
I said to
I said to
my cousin,
my
I said,
cousin,
what are you trying to do?
what you're trying to
Here,
do?
Alexis. So
I hear him talking about what x was. You know,
2x plus 7
plus
is equal
7 is
to
equal to
15.
15.
So you're trying to find out what x is. You mean
we're trying to find out what x was. You in 4.
4. He says, yeah, but you
He
did
says,
it with
yeah,
arithmetic.
but you
have to
did
do
it by
algebra.
arithmetic. You have to do it by algebra.
That's why my cousin was never able to do it.
This my cousin was never able to do algebra.
He didn't understand
He didn't understand
how he was supposed to
how
do
he
it.
was
There was
supposed to
no
do
way.
it.
I learned
There was no way. I learned
algebra fortunately
algebra
by not
unfortunately by
going
not
to school.
going to school.
And knowing the whole idea was to find out what
And
X
knowing
was.
the whole idea was to find out what X was.
It didn't make any difference how you did it.
And it didn't make any difference how you did it.
There's no such a thing as
There's no such thing as,
you don't do it by arithmetic, you do it by algebra.
you know, you do it by arithmetic, you do it by algebra.
It's a false thing that they had invented.
This was a forward statement that they invented in school,
In school, so that the children who have to study algebra
so that the children who have to study the algebra
pass it.
cannot pass it.
They had invented a set of rules
They invented they invented a set of rules,
which, if you followed them,
which if you follow them without thinking,
would produce the
will
answer.
produce the answer. Subtract both sides seven, subtract seven from both sides.
You
You can multiply divide both sides by multiplier,
and so on. A series of
and
steps.
so a
by
series
which you
of
get the
steps
answer. If you
by which you could get the answer.
don't understand what you were trying to do,
If you didn't understand what you're trying to do, if you don't understand what you're trying to do,
I have
I have a friend
who's an artist.
who's an
and
artist.
sometimes taken a view which
He sometimes taken a view which I
I agree with.
don't
very
agree
well.
with
You
very
hold
well.
up a
He
flower
hold up
and
the
say,
flower and say,
Look how
"Look how
beautiful
beautiful it
it is."
is."
I agree.
I agree
And he
with
says,
it.
you see, as I, as an artist,
And he says, "You see, I as an artist
can see how beautiful this
can
is.
see how beautiful this is,
But you, as a scientist,
but you as a scientist,
take this all apart and it becomes dull, thin.
all take this all apart and that and it becomes that thing."
And I think that he's
Okay.
kind of nutty.
I think that he's kind of nutty.
First of all,
First of all,
the beauty that he sees is
the beauty that he sees is available to other people, to me too.
I believe.
I believe.
Although I may not be
Although
quite as
I am,
refined,
although I may not be quite as refined as
aesthetically as he is,
aesthetically he is,
that
I can appreciate the beauty of a flower.
At the same time,
At the same
I see
time,
much
I
more
see
about the
much
flower
more
than
of
he
the
sees.
flower
I
than he
could
sees.
imagine the cells,
I could imagine the
complicated
cells in there,
actions inside, which also have a
complicated action system, which also have a beauty.
beauty. I mean, it's not just beauty at
I
this
mean, it's not just beauty at this dimension of one section.
There's also beauty at a smaller dimension.
There's also beauty at the smaller dimensions.
The inner structure.
The inner structure.
Also the process.
Also the processes.
The fact that
The fact that
the colors
the
and the flowers
colors in the flower evolved
in order to attract
in order to
insects
attract
to
insects
pollinate
to pollinate it
it is interesting.
is interesting. It means the insects can see the color.
It adds a question.
It asks
Does
questions.
aesthetic sense
Does
also
this
exist?
does this aesthetic sense also exist in the love form?
Does it? Why is it?
Why is it
all
existing?
kinds of
All kinds of
interesting
interesting questions
questions, which the science
which just science
knowledge only adds to
only
the
adds to
excitement of
the
mystery and the
excitement and mystery and awe of a flower. It only adds. I don't understand how it subtracts. Never find
Their
that.
father,
Never
Melville
find
Simon,
never find that.
worked for a
Worked
company
up for
which made
company.
uniforms.
Who worked for the company which made a uniform.
This exposure to
This
the
is
military led to a strong
military
rejection of
led
authority.
to a strong rejection of authority, a value he instilled to his son.
one
One of
of the
the
things
things my father told me was disrespect.
you
You
open a picture,
open the picture you
maybe it was a general.
Maybe it
And
was
say, now look
general.
at these humans.
And now you look at these humans.
Here's one human standing
Here's one human standing here,
here, and all these others are bowing. Now, what is the
and
difference?
all these are bowing to him.
Why are they all bowing?
What is the difference? Why are they all bowing to him?
Only because of his
Only
name
because
and
his
his
name
position.
and his position, because of his uniform, not because of something he especially did. What Feynman hated worse than anything else was intellectual pretense, phoniness, false sophistication, jargon.
Was it worth it?
Was it worse? Was it worse than Nobel Prize?
Honestly,
Either.
I don't know anything about the Nobel Prize. I don't understand what it's all about or what's worth what.
I don't know anything about Nobel Prize. I don't understand what it's all about or what's worth what.
And if the people people in the Swedish Academy decide that X, Y, or Z wins a Nobel Prize, then so be it.
And if the people in the Swedish Academy decided X or Y, X, Y, or Z, X or Y, G.
People in the Swedish Academy decide that X, Y, or Z wins a Nobel Prize, then so be it.
Wins a Nobel Prize. And if the people in the Swedish Academy and if the people of Swedish Academy decided X, Y, or Z wins a Nobel Prize, then so be it.
No, I think that it was entirely right and proper.
I think that was entirely right and proper.
It was one of the
It was one of the
best earned
best earned
Nobel Prizes there ever
Nobel
was, I would
Prizes
say.
there ever was.
I
I would
don't
say.
see that it makes any point.
I don't see that was. I don't see that. I don't see that it makes any point. I don't see that it makes any point.
That someone
That someone
in the Swedish
in the
Academy
Swedish
decides that this work
Academy
is noble enough
decided this work noble enough.
to receive a prize.
This work was
In the Swedish Academy decides that this work is noble enough to receive a prize.
is
I've already
noble enough to receive a prize.
got the prize.
already
The
got the
prize is
prize.
the pleasure of
Prizes-
finding the thing out.
Prizes the pleasures of finding the thing out. The prizes the pleasures of finding the thing out.
The kick in the discovery.
The kick in the discovery.
The observation other people use it.
The observation the other people use it.
Those are the real things.
Those are the real things.
The honors are unreal.
The honors are unreal to me.
I don't believe in honors.
I don't believe in honors.
It bothers me.
It
Honors
bothers me.
bothers me. Honors is epaulets. Honors is uniforms.
Honors and uniforms.
papa
My papa
brought me up this
brought me
way.
up
I
this
can't
way.
stand
I
it.
can't
It
stand
hurts
it.
me.
It hurts me. 네. 네, 그리고 이